visiting. My hands are trembling so I can hardly write. 2 Quichuas have just arrived from the Kururai saying that 3 Auca women have come to their house. They are waiting now to take me back to them. I'm leaving Valerie here with Gwen, the missionary. I told you that story, a little bit of it earlier. We'll go down and try to bring the women back here. If I perish, I perish, but I am convinced of God's timing. I was not brought here to Arajuno. This was the other station where I was accompanying this missionary wife who didn't like to stay by herself. I was not brought here for nothing. I'm sure this is what I'm supposed to do, and I go gladly and with great anticipation of what God is able to do for us. Perhaps these will be the 3 informants we have asked for. And then I quote the verse, "This is our God. We have waited for him." I love you all so much. It's 11 a.m. I should be there by 6 this evening. And then parenthesis, this is just fill in, not part of my letter to my parents. The 2 women came to live with me in a Quichua house in Shandia. I'm making this as brief as I can here. But I made contact with these 2 Auca women. There had been a 3rd who had disappeared by the time I got down to the Quichua settlement. And so here were 2 Auca women. Of course, they had come out of the jungle totally naked, but Quichua women had immediately put some clothes on them. But nobody could understand a word they said. There was absolutely no more connection between Quichua and Auca than there is between Greek and Chinese. So we were all at a loss as to why these women had come, what were we supposed to do with them. But they willingly got into the airplane and came back to live with me in the station where I lived in Shandia with the Quichuas. And they were with me for almost a year. I learned enough of their language to understand that they were inviting me to go to their tribe. And incidentally, I was delighted to see the bird that's making such a terrible noise out there, the macaw. We had those birds, many of those in the jungle. And you'd love the Auca word for the macaw, that one that screams such a tremendous volume. The word is "en." Isn't that lovely? You have to put your tongue in the bottom of your bottom lip, and you have to make a very nasal noise. And the word is "en." Say it with me. Isn't that wonderful? You get an idea of what a beautiful language the Auca language is. Anyway, I learned enough of their language to understand that they were inviting me to go to their tribe. I was pretty sure that this is what they were saying. Of course, it was an agonizing year because nobody could interpret for me and nobody knew what they were talking about. But gradually I was catching on to a little bit, and I was pretty sure that what they were saying to me was, when that palm tree gets ripe, we're going home and we want you to go with us. So of course I said, "Will your people kill me as they killed my husband?" And they just put their arms around me. They said, "Are you crazy? Of course not. You're our mother. We love you, and they will love you too." So it was that Valerie, my daughter, who was by that time 3 years old, Rachel Saint, the sister of Nate Saint, the pilot who had been killed, and I went to Tijuana. That was the name of the little river on which the Aucas lived, where Valerie and I stayed for 2 years. And if you want to read all the details of what those wonderful 2 years were like, you can read the book called The Savage, My Kinsman. It tells of learning the language, reducing the language to writing. My daughter, of course, learned the language much faster than I did. Children have a remarkable ability to learn languages. And she was trilingual when she was 3 years old. Not because she was a brilliant child, but because all children are given this miraculous gift of learning languages. And so she learned Auca along with the Quichua and the English, and never got them mixed up. Then a little sampling on the job of a Bible translator. This was written August 25th, 1958. I was living with the Aucas, and I guess you might be interested to know that the house that we lived in had no walls. It was just 6 poles with a thatched roof, no floors, of course, no furniture. I had a hammock strung between 2 of the 6 poles. My daughter slept on a slab of bamboo underneath the hammock, and right beside my hammock I had the fire on the mud floor, which I kept the fire going as everybody else did, 24 hours a day. And I sat in the hammock to do my translation work, agonizing transcription of stuff that you have no idea what the words are that you're writing down. All you can do is get people to talk to you, and then you try to put it into phonetic character, and then you do the translation work, all the various things that go into reducing a language to writing. The work which goes into this sort of thing is just gigantic for one so dull of hearing as I discover myself to be. Last week I made 40 minutes worth of tape in a week. I mean, it was just, you have no idea how hard it was to waylay the Indians and say, would you please sit down here and just talk to me? I mean, they would sit down and talk a blue streak, out of which I might get one word. So this is just a description of the way things went day after day and week after week. In 1 week, I made 40 minutes worth of tape. It took me from Monday afternoon till Friday night to transcribe without Dayuma's help. Now, some of you know who Dayuma was. She was an Auca woman who had left the tribe long years before the 5 men were killed. But when I went and made contact with these 2 Auca women, then Dayuma and Rachel came back from the States, and we all went in together, Valerie, Rachel, Dayuma, and I, along with my 2 Auca friends. So it took me from Monday to Friday to transcribe without Dayuma's help. Of course, I could talk with Dayuma in Quechua, which was a tremendous help. So Dayuma could sometimes translate for me from Quechua into Auca, and also she spoke a very little bit of Spanish. In that time, we got through about 5 minutes of tape in 2 hours. Her attention is drawn to the fish that is smoking over the fire, or the stable fly that is biting Mintaka's backside. So I play it again, make another stab at transcribing it. And if the word I'm trying to get happens to be one which Mintaka and Mancamo said, and Mintaka and Mancamo were the 2 women who had come out to the Quechua settlement, and they were living with Valerie and me, and now had gone back with us. So if that word happened to be one which Mintaka and Mancamo had said, then I would ask Dayuma what it means, but 9 times out of 10, before she can give me a translation, she has to consult them. It goes something like this. I said, what does Uwiyeki mean? Dayuma says, Uwiyeki. Mintaka, there's a fly biting your ankle. Get it? No, there. Yes. Oh, it got away. What did you say? What does Uwiyeki mean? Uwiyeki. Mancamo, what did you say about Uwiyeki? And I said, no, it was Mintaka who said it. Mintaka, what did you say about Uwiyeki? And of course, Dayuma is saying this in Auca, which I could have done that much, but so we weren't getting anywhere at all. So this is Mintaka's answer to what she had said about Uwiyeki. We were all in the yucca patch, hiding from Muipa and his bunch. It was raining, and my sister was lying in a hammock with a leaf over the baby. The water was dripping, pitta, 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 from under the hammock. Unimi always said it was better to lie in a hammock, even if you got wet. Snakes couldn't bite you there at night. So while we were there in the yucca patch, Dabu arrived. He said that he had come over the hill, and the others came by way of the river. All that is supposed to be the translation of Uwiyeki. I'm tearing my hair. Dayuma translates all of the above with a few interpolations of her own for me in Quechua. I said, yes, thank you. And what did you say Uwiyeki means? Dayuma, oh yeah, Uwiyeki. Uwiyeki. Mintaka, did you say Dabu came over the hill or went by the river? Mintaka says, Nimonga and his bunch went by the river. Dayuma says, "It was Dabu that came over the hill." And I said, "Oh, and Uwieki? What does that mean?" Dayuma says, "It means up and around and through the forest and over the hill instead of through the river or by the beaches." And how much of that would you get down? I groan, sigh. Oh, on to the next word. Well, that's enough to bore anybody, isn't it? In 1958, in December of 1958, I made my first trek back out from the Aucas settlement to the missionary station where I had been when the two Quechua Indians had come to ask me if I wanted to see the Aucas. So the Tidmarshes, who were the missionaries that were living in a place called Arahuno, had invited Valerie and me to come anytime we would like to get out of the jungle and visit them. So it took us 3 days by trail and canoe to get from the Aucas to the mission station. So this is what I wrote to my parents about that visit. Today I showed the Aucas how to play an organ. I had a little folding organ, and of course they had never seen anything like it. They'd never seen much of anything. I introduced them to ice, and one of them wrapped his piece of ice in a leaf and told me that he was going to take it home with him, which of course would be a 3-day walk. A typewriter, a stapler, a hammer, a set of drawers, a wood stove, and I don't know what other wonders. To each question, the question was always, "Did you make this?" I show them a piece of paper, and they would smell it and say, "It's made of wood, isn't it?" I mean, they're very astute people. You put them on the street in New York City, they would be bewildered. You put you on a street on a trail with the Aucas, and you'd be much more bewildered. But they kept marveling at the ice and the typewriter and the stapler and the hammer and the set of drawers and the wood stove, and they thought obviously that I must have made them because everything they had made. They didn't have anything that they hadn't made themselves. To each, the question was always, "Did you make this?" And I would say, "No." "Did your husband make this?" "No." "Did Dutu make it?" And that's what they called the missionary that lived on that station. He was actually Dr. Tidmarsh. The closest they could come was Dutu. So did Dutu make it? "No." "Somebody else?" "Yes." As I lay asleep at 5 in the morning, Dabu, who was one of the men who had come back with me, strolled into my bedroom, 5 o'clock in the morning. "Gikadi," that was my nickname, they named me. "You're sleeping?" He wanted fire. And in the Auca settlement, you never needed to use a match. You would just go, and if your fire had gone out, which was very rare, most people kept their fires going 24 hours a day, as I did. But if anybody ran out, they would just go and get some coals, and so he came into my bedroom at 5 in the morning wanting to know if I had some fire to give him, which I didn't in this little shack. As I ate lunch that day, Auca fingers kept interrupting my fork on its way to my mouth. They'd never seen a fork before. They wanted to lick whatever was on it. One man lay down across the table, his bare stomach resting nearly in my plate as he licked the butter from the butter dish and announced that it was fat. Later, another man dropped into the house, took off his pants, handed them to me with instructions to sew them for him. He had split them out while chopping wood on his first day in clothes. Now, remember, these people wore a piece of string around their hips. Sometimes, if they wanted to be very dressed up, they would wear it around their upper arm or sometimes around their thigh. But Dr. Tidmarsh was a very proper Englishman. And so the minute I erupted from the jungle with a whole long string of Auca men behind me, he rushed around and managed to find shorts to put on all of them. But they didn't really like them very much. They didn't think they were very comfortable, so sometimes they wore them on their heads. Now, all this hilarity, I want you to know it was hilarity all the time. I mean, I've never had so much fun in my life as I had with those wonderful people. And they were so simple and so kind. I couldn't get over how sweet they were to my little daughter. 3 years old, she just had a great time. And she's working on a little book. I hope that she will finish it someday. She does hope that she will be able to write a little children's book on her 3 years of living with the Auca Indians. But they were thoughtful. They gave us everything that they had to eat to offer. The very first day that we got there, they gave me this little house to live in. They called it a house. They brought wood for my fire. They brought water from the river. They gave me fish. They gave me, in short, everything they had to offer. And they were kind, they were sweet. And when Dabu got bitten by a snake on the lower lip, a lot of people have the idea that if you walk through the jungle, you should wear boots or puttees or something so you won't get snake bite. Well, by far the worst snake bites that I've seen have been on the head or the upper body, because the snakes are hanging in the long lianas from the trees, and as you're walking through, you can get bitten. And I had sat up all night long syringing blood out of Dabu's mouth because his head had swelled out right to his shoulders. His head, he was absolutely black halfway down his body. And we all took it for granted that he was going to die. I couldn't do anything. I had nothing to do except sit there and try to syringe the blood out of his mouth. But he was so quiet and so patient and so grateful. And Lars and I and my daughter, my son-in-law, and my oldest grandson went to visit the Aucas in 1996. And we saw Dabu. And one of the first things he said to me was, "Gikari," he said, "you did so well that night." And I realized that he remembered that I was the only one that sat with him all night. He had 2 wives, and not because he was oversexed or anything and wanted to have 2 wives. It was because they were both widows, and there were only 7 men in this whole group that we had contact with, and 53 women and children. So all of those men had to work all day, every day, to feed the 53 people. And of course, with us 3 foreigners, that added 3 more mouths. Now, we tried to have food dropped to us by the airplane so as not to feel that the Aucas had to feel that they had to feed us. But they were just so generous with whatever they had. And dear Dabu, to remember that I had sat up all that night, of course, it brought tears to my eyes. When Lars and I got out of the airplane to see these people, of course, this was his first opportunity to meet these people. He did see 2 of the men that had done the killing. And as we got out of the airplane, the first thing they said to me was, "Gikari bitimi ikpikiano," which means, "Gikari, you have gotten so old." And I laughed and I said, "And so have you." I think both of those men, we saw 2 of the men that had done the killing then, and they were both probably just a little older than I am. And old Gikita, the oldest man in the tribe, he was the first one that had thrown a spear, and he died, I think it was just 2 years ago now. We didn't get to see him, but he was probably in his 80s. None of them knew how old they were. But I think back on these wonderful years that God gave me, very trying years in many ways, many lonely years in many ways. I was in Ecuador for 11 years altogether. But I think of that wonderful hymn, "God moves in a mysterious way his wonders to perform. He plants his footsteps in the sea and rides upon the storm. His purposes will ripen fast, unfolding every hour. The bud may have a bitter taste, but sweet will be the flower. Blind unbelief is sure to err and scan his work in vain. God is his own interpreter, and he will make it plain. Ye fearful saints, fresh courage take. The clouds ye so much dread are big with mercy and will break in blessing on your heads. And I think of the wisdom of God, the mercy of God in choosing those 5 men at that particular time. And at the time, we 5 wives were just inundated with letters from all over the world. I got a mailbag this big within a few weeks after my husband's death. And of course, answered all of those letters. They came from all over the world. And we thought it was amazing that God would choose to take these men away in such a crucial time. But you know, that was 1956. This is 1999. And it has burgeoned and burgeoned and burgeoned, and there isn't a week that goes by that I don't hear from somebody else whose life has been changed through the testimony of those 5 men. And it was very interesting to me to note the prophetic entries in Jim's diary. For example, when he was 22 years old, he wrote the words that many of you are familiar with: "He is no fool who gives what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose." He also wrote, "Have my blood, Lord, have it all. Let it be poured out for the life of the world." And of course, all 5 of the men were speared to death, and it took a long time to get them dead. I know many of you are wondering, why did they kill the men? And you can be sure I got that on tape. I asked them, and I got 2 tapes from 2 men who had done the killing. Each of them gave me a 45-minute account of everything that happened on that day. And a third person was a woman who had watched everything. And their stories matched, and their motivation was nothing but fear. They thought the 5 men were cannibals and had come to eat them. They were not bloodthirsty people. They were not hostile. They just thought that they had to protect their children, and thereby they had to kill the 5 men. So I think of these mysterious ways in which God works. And Jim also wrote, "I don't ask for a long life, but a full one like yours, Lord Jesus." May we never doubt the mercy and the wisdom of God. What a friend we have in Jesus. God bless you.